collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Well, it's good to be back after the summer break. I hope you've had a good holiday, which is more than can be said for the huge number of dogs abandoned by their owners at this time of year.
This year is beyond words. It's raining dogs. And unfortunately, many puppies as well. As so many people keep their pets unneutered.
A new strategy could be in the offing to tackle the problem of invasive lionfish in our seas.
The trap is deployed off a boat and it is left on the bottom of the reef or the sediment of the area where it has been placed. And then at a certain point it will just be picked up rather using a fishing reel or by hand, so it's possible to do both.
And we get the lowdown on responsible borrowing and lending.
It is the only way to assess in a correct way both the creditworthiness and the repayment ability of the consumers.
Dog shelters in Cyprus are apparently bursting at the seams. As in other countries, after the pandemic, when a lot of people adopted pets to keep them company, now that the cost of living is rising exponentially, a lot of people are looking to offload their pets because they say they can't afford to keep them. So what's the situation here in Cyprus? Monica Mitsidou is a volunteer at the Dog Rescue Cyprus NGO and she joins us now. Monica, have you noticed an uptick in the number of dogs being abandoned recently?
Yes, July, August is always months that we get a lot of strays because people go on holidays and they just don't bother, to pay for hotels or whatever, or they leave their pets in the gardens and somebody goes to feed them and the dogs escape. So these months are always bad months together with the hunting season month. But this year is beyond words. It's raining dogs. And unfortunately, many puppies as well. As so many people keep their pets unneutered, they keep them outside, and we all know if a bitch, it's her season, and she lives outside, there is no way that she won't get pregnant.
I am appalled, Monica, at your very first sentence about people going off for a couple of weeks' holidays and just dumping their pets.
Yeah, it's very common.
What can we do about that?
Sorry, what can we do?
Yeah.
Educate people, I guess, but unfortunately, the only chance to educate people, from my experience, is to educate the young generation. As older people, adults, they are not very easy to change their attitude towards animals. They are dispensable for them. Is that the right word?
Yeah, they don't feel that they're part of the family, obviously. Let me ask...
Obviously not. I mean, they just take a dog because the neighbor's dog has a litter and he's giving them away, or they get a dog because they want the kids to play. They never realize that it's a commitment for 15 years for them. If they put a bowl of water and a bowl of food, scraps from lunch, dogs should be happy. And another issue is the size. So many people get dogs from friends, from co-workers, from social media sites, unwanted litters. They don't even ask how big are they going to get. They are clueless about dogs, about breeds. And then you get a family that has no time. They are all couch potatoes, and they get a very active dog that they cannot manage. They will not bother, of course, to train the dog. So the dog ends up either in a cage, which is legal, unfortunately, either in the yard, either they take it, they have a field with trees and they take it there and they go and feed it once a week. I mean, I've seen it all. Honestly. Most of these dogs in Cyprus that are given away have a very hard life if they survive.
Let me ask you whether, because I know all the animal shelters are very short of funding, whether or not it's feasible for some of you to become, in a sense, short-term dog hotels at a much reduced rate. It might supplement your income slightly, but of course would be very unpopular, I guess, with the registered dog and cat hotels.
Yeah, it's not only that. It's that in shelters you get dogs that you don't know their history. Usually we keep them until we know their health state. Some of them come with skin problems, some of them are contagious. Sometimes we get puppies with deadly diseases. This cannot happen. I mean, imagine people paying for their dogs to come and stay in a shelter and going home with kennel cough or a skin problem. And also you need the extra volunteers to do this, because another huge problem is no volunteers. Nobody has the time. Nobody comes and stays. It's painful when you love animals to see them in cages, to see them broken, and to build their bodies back into health and their souls. So we are running out of volunteers as well, committed volunteers. I'm not talking about somebody who will come once in a while. And I must say that even the committed ones, they started reducing their time and their work because it's taking over your life.
It must also be very depressing.
You need to find a way to deal with it and what we do in order to survive, because it is depressing. It's very unfair, mostly, very unfair to the animals. What we try to do is concentrate on the small battles we win and not see the whole war, because we will never win the war. We are a few against many.
Yes, and I might add, we've got to bring this to a close in a moment, Monica. I might add that you get very little support, don't you, from the government. What would you like to see happen that could make a difference to all the various dog shelters and indeed cat shelters in Cyprus?
Okay, funding is very important, but for me it's not the solution. The solution is not to have shelters, not to need to have so many shelters with so many dogs. So the real problem is too many dogs. So for me there is only one solution: neutering the dogs. If every responsible dog parent neutered their dogs, we wouldn't need shelters. The reason we exist is because there are so many dogs given to people who shouldn't have dogs. No laws that exist are implemented. So what we do, we try to cure the symptom, not the disease.
You end up picking up the pieces, I guess, Monica. It's all, as I said, very depressing, but the bottom line seems to be education. I sincerely hope that as people come back from their holidays, a few of them might consider even fostering a dog or a cat to try and take the pressure off our dog shelters. We'll talk again, maybe nearer Christmas, because there's another message to be put out then, I think. Monica Mitsidou from the Dog Rescue Cyprus NGO, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
We've spoken before on the programme about the problem of lionfish, which are not usually found in the Mediterranean, but they come through the Suez Canal, and they're quite a problem when it comes to the natural biodiversity of our seas. This is being addressed by the Marine and Environmental Research, or MER Lab, and they have an intern from the University of Plymouth with them at the moment. He is Cameron Senior, and he is constructing lionfish traps for use in the waters around Cyprus. Cameron, I've seen pictures of this thing. In one sense it looks quite complicated, but in another sense it seems relatively simple. How are you going about building these?
We are currently building the traps by ourselves with the assistance of MER, We bought all the materials ourselves, and we've currently built 3 traps to use for a pilot study.
And these seem to work by attracting the lionfish to what looks like just a piece of netting in the middle. Explain that.
So lionfish are crepuscular creatures that are mainly active during the night, but during the day, they like to sit around complex structures such as reefs and artificial reefs. The white netting in the middle is called a fish aggregating device, and it acts as a reef, so it attracts these lionfish, and they sit there and wait around, usually as they do during the daytimes in normal reefs and artificial reefs. These traps have been tested already, and they were developed by a scientist called Steve Gittings in America, and they were used in the Atlantic, and they were proven to be successful at attracting the fish and catching them. So at the moment for this pilot study, we want to see how effective they are within Cypriot waters.
Well, we've got a pretty good idea, I think, from previous excursions by spear fishermen and so on who have been hunting these lionfish, but obviously one at a time is not terribly effective because they do breed very fast, I understand. So how many do you think that your trap might be able to catch in one go?
Well, it depends on the size of the traps. So these traps have been used at different radius. So my traps are a radius of 3.15 meters squared. So they have been seen to catch up to about 13 lionfish at a time within the Atlantic. But the issue is depends how many are tracked overall, because it depends the area where they get dropped, if it's near a reef, how far it's away from the reef, how many lionfish itself are accumulating in the area. It's all very dependent on the situation.
So presumably you do have to have divers perhaps going around and suggesting that this might be a good place because they've seen a lot of them.
So there are records, there's hundreds of records of lionfish being recorded all around Cyprus, from scuba divers, fishermen, free divers as well. So the records will help, and they're quite predictable creatures in the fact of where they'll be found. As I've mentioned previously, as they work around artificial reefs, and in my study we are currently trying to find out what would be the best time to pick up the traps. So we know that where lionfish are found, so we need to know how long the traps need to be soaked for and what would be the peak time of retrieving the traps. And for example, say we are studying over 7 days, so I will dive on the first day to see how many are attracted, and I'll dive on the third day, and I'll dive on the 7th day. So then I'll use the research developed from my pilot study to help advance with Department of Fisheries and local commercial fisheries to understand when to pick up the traps.
Right, when you say pick up the traps, actually somebody has to pull a string or something, don't they, to make the thing close?
Yes, so it's all through human mechanics of closing the net. So what will happen is the trap is deployed off a boat, and it is left on the bottom of the reef or the sediment of the area where it has been placed. And then at a certain point, it will just be picked up rather using a fishing reel or by hand. So it's possible to do both. In the previous studies in the Atlantic, they used airbags by scuba divers, but that's not very feasible for local fishermen. So we have developed a way of adding extra ropes so they can pull it up from the surface.
So you're actually going to be using the local fishermen to do this, and will they keep their catch? Because they're quite valuable, actually, aren't they?
So at the moment, it depends. We may particularly bring in fishermen for this pilot study, but at the moment, we're also working with the Department of Fisheries of potentially advancing on my project. So that will be mainly incorporating the fishermen then after this pilot study if it's proven effective around those times. The lionfish themselves, yes, they can be quite valuable. For the past couple of years, we have been trying to incorporate them into local diets and taking them to restaurants and work with local chefs, and so it's really good for the local community, as in economically and socially.
And
environmentally
we should also put in a caveat there, and that is that if you catch a lionfish and you don't know how to prepare it, then don't eat it, because they are poisonous unless certain parts are removed, aren't they?
100%. So they have venomous spines on their back, their pectoral fins, and their anal fins. So they can be very difficult to handle, but they are also very easy if you do know what to do. So, but luckily there's many manuals and preparation techniques that have been recorded and created by local restaurants, by people at Mer themselves, and it's quite easy to get a hold of. So if any local fishermen do catch these, it's very easy to educate themselves or be educated about the topic.
Right, but mostly I think we should say don't do this at home, as it were. So, you're going to be putting these traps down, and how long will this study run to see how effective it is?
The study will be running over a 3-week period, so I'll be deploying the traps for 7 days of 3 times. So I'll get 9 replicas on to see how effective the soak times are and to see when to pick up the traps themselves. So this will help if there is accumulation of lionfish and it is effective. So this will help for future use and studies by the Department of Fisheries or by local fishermen themselves if they want to.
Now, you catch lionfish, but what about other fish? Because some of our fish are quite small, and if they get hauled up by fishermen and kept, then we're reducing the local population because they're not breeding.
Well, the benefit of these traps is that they only will affect other fish if they are caught within the traps. But the studies have shown also in the Atlantic that it mainly incorporates only lionfish. Only lionfish are really attracted to the FAD. But this is because smaller fish are more attracted to the reefs and other organisms they can eat on the reefs. But the lionfish themselves are more attracted to the complex areas of where the fish will be found. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but is it possible for them to end up lost on the seabed? What happens then?
So the benefit of these traps is it avoids ghost fishing. So ghost fishing occurs when discarded nets or discarded lines are lost out at sea. That happens all the time, human error from the current on the boat, getting caught on nets and other reefs. And that continues to catch other organisms, which also creates a massive problem for the ecosystem. But with these traps, if they are lost at sea, they will not close, they will not cause any issues to the ecosystem or protect other species because they are only ever causing catch rate when they are pulled up by the humans. So if they're lost at sea, the benefit of it as well is that you know the deployment marks of them. So you can retrieve them by diving. It depends how deep they've been deployed, but they can be retrieved by airbags and that, which will prevent sea littering and marine littering, which then stops that problem as well.
Well, that sounds good enough. What about maintenance of the things? How difficult or how expensive are they to maintain? Wear and tear?
So the traps themselves, they're quite feasible to create. It only cost us about, I would say, €200 to create 3 traps. And if you're looking at the long run with a high amount of traps, they're easy to maintain because one of the steel that you use for the rebar, and if the net breaks, it's easy to change the net. And the FAD itself is very easy to manipulate and buy a new one because it's very cheap. So if that gets broken, it's very easy to repair, and it's a very simple design. So there's no complexity in repairs. There's no real mechanical issues. It's all very simple, actually. So that does help as well.
Well, as I said at the beginning, we've talked about lionfish and the problem we have with them in the Mediterranean now that they come through the Suez Canal. So hopefully, Cameron, this is going to go some way towards reducing their impact on our species that we normally expect to see here, because they're being predated quite seriously, I think, by the lionfish. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much, Rosie, and thank you for this opportunity for this interview.
Cameron Senior from the University of Plymouth, talking there about a new strategy that may be employed in the waters around Cyprus to try and reduce the number of those invasive lionfish.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
We all know, I think, that one of the big problems faced by the banks in Cyprus are the non-performing loans. How is it that for so many years people have been able to take out loans when they can't service them? Well, that's all about to change, it seems. I'm going to talk next to the General Manager of the Artemis Credit Bureau. He is Yannis Thomasidis. He's recently been at a European Association of Credit Bureaus conference in Brussels. So, Yanni, let's first, if we may, find out a bit about what the Artemis Credit Bureau does.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Artemis Credit Bureau is a type of organization which is privately owned and processes information on a creditor's clients in order to support the creditors, in order to analyze the client's creditworthiness. It's a very useful type of association that has been around in Europe and globally for decades now. In Cyprus, it was established back in 2008 as an initiative of the Association of Cyprus Banks. And ever since, it offers value to the banking system and to the consumers themselves, as we will explain further on. We are the only credit bureau in Cyprus. We are recognized by the World Bank, and we are also, as you correctly said, part of the European Association of the Credit Bureaus called Axis, based in Brussels.
Now, a lot of people listening will say, hang on a minute, it's none of your business about my finances.
This is not really the case, because the financial institutions, they have this obligation, if you like, when they receive a loan application to assess the creditworthiness of the customers. First of all, to make sure that they handle in the proper way the credit risk they are taking while granting a loan, but also at the same time, in order to protect the consumers themselves for taking up a loan that they cannot really pay based on their financial capabilities. So a credit bureau sits between the creditors and the consumers, and it facilitates this transaction, this relationship, if you like, when it comes to the lending facilities for the benefits of both parties.
All right, but you said at the beginning it's a private company. So what about data protection and that sort of stuff?
Okay, the majority of the credit bureaus are private companies in Europe. Although Artemis is a private organization, it's a subsidiary of the Association of Cyprus Banks, so it has this more systemic role on that respect. But at the same time, we should mention something very important, that since 2014, when our database was enriched with the information we have today, the operation of the register is governed by a banking law and a relevant directive of the Central Bank. So in essence, we are implementing a directive of the Central Bank, and we have this systemic role based on the law for the benefit of the system itself.
People might ask, why don't the banks do this checking themselves?
The banks do the checking themselves through our database, but what is our role? Our role is to gather information about the borrowers from each and every bank. We consolidate this information in our database so as we build a profile for each of those borrowers, and we give access to the bank to a complete profile of the borrower in the database. And what does this profile entail? We call it credit report in our language. It shows the facilities that the consumer has, either as an owner or a guarantor or a security provider. This complete picture of facilities is the only way for the bank to have a holistic view of the client's credit facilities, and it's the only way to assess in a correct way, as I said before, both the credit worthiness and the repayment ability of the consumer. So this system has proved to be working efficiently, as I said before, for many decades abroad, and it does also in Cyprus. We realize the importance of our role, and therefore from the very beginning our operation was built and maintained in close cooperation with the authorities, namely the Central Bank of Cyprus, the Office of the Commissioner for the Personal Data Protection, and the Ministry of Finance.
Right, what about if I have a bank account abroad? How are you going to know about that?
That we don't know. We only cover the Cyprus market. In our database, in our register, all the banks and the credit acquiring companies participate. We have 33 institutions in total. But as I said before, we cover only the Cyprus market. There is no way through our database for a bank to know about the facility of the consumer being abroad. Nevertheless, in the interview process, from what we are aware, the consumer is asked to state any facility he has abroad. Something else which we need to also stress is the fact that although our system and database has useful information for the financial institutions, the nature of this information is of supportive role. This information does not force a financial institution or a credit acquiring company to proceed or not with a particular transaction or granting of new facility or restructuring. This is something important to keep in mind, because always the credit bureaus have a supportive role in the decision-making process of the financial institutions. Nevertheless, the role and the data of a credit bureau allow both the institutions and the consumers to make more informed decisions, and this is where the value comes in the system itself.
Okay, when I mentioned foreign accounts, what I was thinking of is there's a large number of people in Cyprus who are simply not servicing their loans. The NPLs are a real problem here. And so let's say I'm one of these people and I owe a lot of money to the bank. Now, I assume that my credit rating here, according to you, will be very bad indeed, but you don't know that I've got a Swiss bank account with millions in it. So doesn't that sort of mean that it's not, if you're clever with your finances, really helping the financial institutions?
First of all, let me start by saying that credit bureaus in general do not have deposit accounts in their registers. They only have credit facility accounts. So even if you had those deposits in Cyprus, a credit bureau would never know. It's again the responsibility of the consumer to state these deposits. From there on, definitely the creditworthiness assessment is of high importance when it comes to the dealing of the non-performing loans. As I said before, we help institutions to manage their credit risk. We don't have a credit rating for the time being. We just have a snapshot in the credit report of the facilities which are active today. Nevertheless, even with this information, the banks are able, the credit acquiring companies are able to have a good picture about the consumer, and it is proved in action through the surveys we run on an annual basis and the feedback we receive from the institutions that they find Artemis Credit Bureau's system to be a very useful tool in their hand. Definitely, had it been there before 2008, I think it would have helped the issue of the non-performing loans. The main criteria used nowadays is not the collateral that one will put on his facility, but it's the repayment ability. When I say repayment ability, what is your income? How much percentage of this income goes to existing loans? What is your remaining available disposable income? And based on that, there is a judgment whether you can afford taking another loan or not. This promotes, at the same time, a more responsible financial behavior from the side of the consumers, in the sense that they become more aware about the responsibility of being either an owner or a guarantor in a loan. And at the macro level, this helps the economy and the system before that, at the more micro level, the economy and the system to be healthier, less burdened on non-performing facilities, which definitely are harmful both to the institutions but to the consumers themselves as well.
Okay, let me ask you one last question, and that is, people's credit rating changes, doesn't it? Suppose I leave the job I'm in at the moment and get a very high-paying job. That means that what was bad is now much better. So how quickly does your assessment change? And I want to ask, I think I'm allowed, am I not, to access the information you hold on me?
Very good questions. When it comes to the update of the database, this happens on a monthly basis. So we have a relatively fresh picture of the facilities of the borrower. Now, as I said before, we don't have a credit rating. We don't have the income as part of this database. We have the facilities, the picture of the facilities, but this is that information, in addition to whatever the borrower has communicated to the bank, help the bank form a complete picture. Now, the other important question was about the right of access. Now, the General Data Protection Regulation, as we know in its acronym, the GDPR, allows the consumer to apply to our customer service office so as to get his or her credit report, and it's actually free once in the calendar year. For the second time in a year, we charge 10 euros. Now, that's a very good starting point for a consumer to improve his financial picture or image in the market if he or she knows where he or she stands today when it comes to the credit facilities. And again, I'm referring not only to the facilities that someone has as an owner, the actual borrower, but also the ones that they have signed as a guarantor or guarantor of a limited guarantee or security provider, which is, as you know, in Cyprus, it's still a big extent, although our feeling is that this is being reduced. So, yes, someone can apply either in person to our offices in 77 Strovolos Avenue. Someone can check our website www.artemis.com.cy to get all the information, or he can also send his or her application form via mail, and we will reply back in registered mail. So again, we'll get in his hands his credit report.
That is Yannis Tomasidis, the General Manager of the Artemis Credit Bureau. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.